military operations between Israel and Gaza. As the death toll climbs, there's the specter of 4 years ago and the ground invasion of that Palestinian territory. Neither side, though, seems to want to go for broke, not yet at least. The Israelis denying the claim of Hamas leader in exile that they've asked for a truce. Khaled Mashal, who told a Cairo press conference Monday, whoever started the war must end it, end quote. Here we can show you also in the company of Egypt's president, for whom the escalation in violence could spell the mother of all challenges on the world stage. Even though Mohammed Morsi hails from the same Muslim Brotherhood as Hamas, he still looks like the best pivot for any compromise. Who besides Egypt can help? Well, France has offered its services, but Paris doesn't speak to Hamas. The UN Secretary General is in Cairo, very far from the Middle East. The U.S. president's on a tour of Southeast Asia, where after burning much political capital early in his first term, trying to broker a deal between Israelis and Palestinians, Barack Obama warning he certainly won't test the waters again for a long while if mediation fails. Today in the France 24 debate, who's going to step in and stop the escalation? With us to talk about it, former foreign policy advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister and Israeli Prime Minister to the UN, Dore Gold. Thank you for being with us. You're the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. From the Gaza Strip, Hani Al-Bassous, who teaches at the Islamic University of Gaza. Thank you for being with us. Joining us from the University of Exeter in the UK, Egyptian political scientist Omar Ashur. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. And France 24 International Affairs editor Annette Young, who spent 7 years covering the Middle East up close from Jerusalem. The France 24 debate, where you can always weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter. You can find us at Francois F24. Let's begin, though, with a live update from Gaza City and join France 24's Gallagher Fenwick. When the day began, Gallagher, you were reporting that there hadn't been so far, everything being relative, the same kind of intensity felt as there was 4 years ago. At the end of this sixth day of escalation, what's the sense?
Well, there's two theories to explain that going around Gaza. One of them is that indeed there might be some kind of war over the long run in preparation, meaning that this conflict might last for quite a while. Remember the Israeli commander for the home front saying that fighting could last up to 7 weeks. He had made that declaration a couple of days ago. And so that may be what's going on right here. This is a lot less intense than Operation Cast Lead. Another reason for this, if you will, and this is, of course, very relative because there were Israeli airstrikes today, and I did see rockets, flying out of Gaza towards Israel as well. So you can't really talk about a complete rule. Now, another perhaps reason for this is, simply that these talks in Cairo are perhaps beginning to bear some sort of fruits out here on the ground. But I can tell you that going around and asking Gazans, all they see around them for the moment is destruction, more violence, and death, with the Israeli operation having entered a new phase where now buildings or houses supposedly housing Hamas or Islamic Jihad operatives, according to Israeli intelligence, are now being targeted, and that is causing material damage but also collateral victims, as we saw yesterday, Sunday, for instance, which was the deadliest day since the beginning of Operation Pillar of Defense.
All right, and we know that you got front row seats to that with the attack on where there's the television studios. Gallagher Fenwick, thanks for that update from Gaza City. Interesting to hear Gallagher talking about how some people feel as though this could last a long while, but how much of a stomach do the two sides have for a repeat of 4 years ago? Publicly, both sides insist they're not going to blink first.
We will continue to operate, strike, and even extend the operation against the rocket launching facilities, against the activists, and against others. And if it is necessary, we will not hesitate to launch a ground operation as well.
We will not accept any Israeli demands. They are the ones who attacked. A ceasefire will occur when our demands are met. They are asking for a ceasefire. Then the aggression should also end, and we insist on the achievement of our demands.
So a dead end? Well, not exactly, as the death toll in Gaza tops 100 amid the rocket fire airstrikes, the Israeli army calling up reserves. There is indeed a flurry of diplomacy going on, and even though Hosni Mubarak is no longer in charge in Egypt, it's through Cairo where it all seems to be happening.
I think we're close, but the nature of this kind of negotiation, it's very difficult to predict. But as I mentioned, everybody is eager to stop this yesterday, or even should have not started.
Annette Young, a lot of conflicting messages we've seen in the last 24 hours.
Certainly, and that's always the case. Welcome to the quagmire that's otherwise known as the Middle East, Francois. I mean, the reality is what we're seeing at the moment, it's a lot of posturing going on. Unfortunately, innocent lives are being lost in the process. But it's a case of both sides using what's going on as leverage to strengthen their position. On the Israeli side, clearly they want to end that rocket fire. Let's not forget we're 2 months away from an Israeli election. 1 million out of its 7+ million residents are suffering from that rocket fire. That's a sizable portion of the electorate. Not to say that that's the sole reason, but also we are in a period in terms of what's going on in American politics where there's sort of a quiet time before the inauguration. It's very similar because I was there last time 4 years ago. We are exactly at the same point in terms of waiting for a new administration, or in this case Obama to be inaugurated for his second term. We are less than several months away from an Israeli election. That's exactly what was the case last time around. But also, let's not forget the fact that Hamas recently started firing these rockets again. For a number of years, they were adhering this rather shaky ceasefire, which had been sort of put in place since the end of that operation in 2009. But for a number of domestic political reasons, they started to get involved with that rocket firing again. They upped the ante. They also are just equally aware of the fact that we are in the middle of an Israeli election campaign. So there's a lot of vested interests at play here. A lot of vested interests. All sides dealing with their own public opinion in the way they can. Israel, of course, no exception. The son of former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon shocked many with this fiery column in the Jerusalem Post, where he wrote, we need to flatten entire neighborhoods of Gaza, flatten all of Gaza. The Americans didn't stop with Hiroshima. The Japanese weren't surrendering fast enough, so they hit Nagasaki too. Not everyone, though, inside Israel, though, shares that view. A poll done by the daily newspaper Haaretz says 84% are supporting the current military operation, but only 30% support a ground attack inside of Gaza. Dore Gold, what happened 4 years ago is present on everyone's mind?
I think so, but I think Hamas has made a huge strategic error. They received rockets from the Iranians known as the Fajr 5, which suddenly put Tel Aviv in range. And then they actually fired them at Tel Aviv. So what they've created is a massive Israeli consensus, from the rich neighborhoods of North Tel Aviv to the poor farmers who have been getting hammered by Hamas mortars and rockets in the area around the Gaza Strip, like the city of Sderot. And that's why you see such national unity in Israel. All Israelis are agreed on one very simple point, and you don't have to be a political scientist to figure this out. Hamas must stop the rocket fire against Israeli towns and villages, against Israeli cities. If that isn't secured, there's no way this military operation will end. But there's the question of the level of the response. And 4 years ago, when Prime Minister Ehud Olmert invaded, politically it didn't serve him well. There was a big uproar in the international community over the more than 1,300 killed, and he lost the general election. That must be weighing on the mind of the Israeli Prime Minister. He must be treading carefully at this point. Well, actually, he didn't run in the election. It was his deputy, the foreign minister, Tzipi Livni, who wasn't able to put together a coalition. And I think all Israelis are united, whether they come from Olmert's old Kadima party or they come from the Likud of Prime Minister Netanyahu, that the rocket fire must end. The Labour Party, the more left-wing parties in Israel, this is a wall-to-wall consensus. And you know something? No country, France, the UK, could tolerate rocket fire on its cities. It's just very simple. And that's what that poll shows. But invading is a different matter. Well, Israelis want this. I mean, if you ask a more, detailed question, if it's necessary to move the ground forces into Gaza to end rocket fire on Israel, should we do it? The numbers would go up.
Well, certainly not in that poll. Hani al-Bassous, what's your view from the Gaza Strip on this? Are we, as Gallagher Fenwick was saying at the top, braced for something long?
Well, I think so. The situation is very tense, and the attacks intensified for the past 2 days. And I think the Israeli army has went to a second stage of attacking houses of civilians, police stations, and some compounds of the Palestinian Authority and the media channels in Gaza. Many Palestinians have been killed. I think today only more than 25 Palestinians were killed by the airstrikes which committed by the Israeli forces. And I think this comes because the ceasefire was not reached. There was talks yesterday about ceasefire, and up to this moment nothing has been achieved. I think the situation most likely will continue like this for the next 2-3 days at least, until something can be done. Talks has been between Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the United States to put some pressure on the Israeli side and Hamas as well to accept the deal. But both sides have their own conditions, trying to reach something, a conclusion which can be satisfactory to the people of Palestine or the people in Israel itself. I think amid this situation, the escalation more likely would continue for the next 2-3 days, and the people in Gaza would suffer more than can be expected, especially where civilians most likely have been targeted. As we could witness yesterday and today, many of the homes of the Palestinian civilians have been attacked. Yesterday only, one of the family, a Delo family, had lost 11 members of the same family. 5 of them are brothers and sisters. So such an attack by the Israeli forces would put more pressure on Hamas to accept the ceasefire, and would like to bring Hamas on their knees, and the Palestinian society the same. And I think such an action by the Israeli army will lead to more escalation and more attacks. It will not lead to a ceasefire. If Netanyahu would like to have a ceasefire and long-term truce, I think he would have to think in a different way. He would have to...
I just want to bring in at this point Omar Ashur, because it's an interesting point you make, Hani al-Bassous. The Israeli attacks basically are rallying public opinion, says Dore Gold, and rallying, Palestinian opinion, says we don't have Omar Ashur, I'm being told. Little technical issues. Apologies for that. We'll try to sort it out. But on the one hand, the attacks of one side rallying people to the cause of the other, and vice versa. So we seem to be, again, at a dead end as far as that goes. On the Global Post website, though, Erin Cunningham posted a piece where she wrote, she asked, with the Muslim Brotherhood now in power in Egypt and at Young, is Hamas more powerful than ever?
Certainly much more powerful than they were 4 years ago. And they are using this to test their allegiance with the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as with other key brand new friends that they have, such as Turkey and Qatar. They want to use this opportunity, seize this opportunity as such. And it's putting Mohammed Morsi in a very difficult position indeed, because he has to, on one hand, protect that cold peace that he has with Israel, because he knows if that goes down the gurgler, so does $1 billion of aid annually given to him by Washington. I mean, it's all interlinked. On the other hand, he's made his position known in the past of very loudly defending Hamas and the rights of the Palestinians. Having said that, I would just point out that in recent months, when there were attacks by militants on Egyptian border posts in which a number of Egyptian soldiers were closed, President Morsi acted very quickly, and he shut down that Rafah border crossing. So there is some theories going around that Hamas are also using this to test their relationship with the president by pushing for a lifting of that sort of ability to shut down the border crossings. In other words, to allow that Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt to be open 24 hours, 7 days a week, in order to allow them to build the economy. So again, it's a sense of, all these various vested interests at play during this crucial round of negotiations.
Right now, the situation at that, what is it, how long is that strip of border between Egypt and and Gaza, it's
Philadelphia.
It's called what? It's 8 kilometers. It's very
It's incredibly narrow.
And right now, what's the situation there? What's the status?
Well, at the moment, from my understanding, is that the crossing remains closed, and while violence continues. But I mean, it depends on the whim of various powers, And the problem is also with Hamas is they can rely, and they've proved to the Israelis that regardless of their economic siege, they can get material through those tunnels. That economic siege is not working. And in fact, this is one of the things that Hamas is asking for in this round of negotiations, that Israel lift the last of those, of the last remaining elements of their economic siege. It was watered down somewhat after the Gaza flotilla raid back in 2010. But, it's proved to all and sundry that it can exist. In fact, it's done very well. I mean, the economy had a bit of an upturn in recent months before this recent round of violence. But again, this is a message going out equally to Jerusalem as it is to Cairo, which is we want to be given the power to run up this part of the world. They're showing their muscle as such.
Showing their muscle. When you look, Dore Gold, at the fact that 4 years ago the leader in exile was in Damascus, and now Khaled Mashal, and now he is in Cairo. Does that make him more formidable, or does that bring him into the fold for eventual talks one day?
Well, that's a very good question. I think Hamas is testing Egypt. And, we just had this visit of the Egyptian Prime Minister to the Gaza Strip this past Friday. And the Egyptians asked Israel, they asked Hamas, no firing of weapons while the Egyptian Prime Minister is there. Israel adhered. The Hamas fired 35 rockets. Now, I'm not trying to play the blame game here, but what's interesting is that Hamas assumes it can push its luck with Egypt. Because what Hamas has, and I think President Morsi is aware of it, is Hamas can call for assistance from the Egyptian people. It can fill Tahrir Square with supporters and put pressure on the Egyptian government. And therefore, I think Hamas feels it has leverage over Egypt. And what we're hoping in Israel is that Egypt will stand firm with the positions of the international community, that rocket fire on a country is illegitimate. And you can't work that into some agreement and cast some kind of acceptability for it. It must stop, which is our fundamental position.
All right, I want to get the response from Hani Al-Bassous, but unfortunately we have to go to the break. We'll do that when we get back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.